Coates came into first class only when he thought he was cheating the Cunard Company. I sometimes went into third class to see him and the 60 friends he had already made. We made plans about Spain. Coates figured he would have to swim a certain river on the French border to get into the country. They probably won't like us in Spain any more than they did in China or India, he prophesied. Being a naturalized American, Coates wasn't supposed to become involved in any foreign wars. The same situation as the Sino-Japanese muddle we'd been in, and he could only stay out of the United States for a certain length of time. In 1938, I was still a British subject. It was easier for me to get a permit to enter Spain. I simply went to the Spanish consul, showed my first book and a couple of magazine articles I had written, and received permission to enter Spain as a journalist observer. Lily was still hot on my spoor. She had arrived in London, and unable to pick up my tracks, she went to Paris. Coates and I arrived in Paris, and I went to the Plaza Athénée. Just my luck. I might have known she would be there too. Her mother was with her. Mama was typical French, but physically bore no resemblances to her daughter except for a violent temper. For a day or two, we tried to live together again. We stayed in the same suite. But there was a running argument, that bitter, vituperative talk that can twist the guts. When the wits are keen, the language violent and dirty. You do not care. You are hurting each other. You intend to hurt. The more you wound, the better it is, and then you feel you want to throw up. Coates and I left Paris on March 26th. At Barcelona, I was surprised to be met by two gentlemen who spoke only Spanish. Neither Coates nor I could speak it well, but I gathered that we were being welcomed. A man with a car was assigned to us. His name was Pepe. He was from Palma de Mallorca. He could speak English. He was a curious example of indefiniteness in the human form. You couldn't tell his age, not even his height very clearly, nor could you decide whether he was good-looking or ugly. Nature hadn't given him a single striking characteristic, yet he was at hand all the time, like a shadow, and he could drive a car. As we moved through Barcelona, he gave us a running commentary of the city, and the course the war had taken so far. It had been on about 2 years. My mood, as we drove, was morbid. I had the feeling I had come to die, and it might not matter much if I did. No one would mourn me. I felt unreal, tired, beat up by life, with Lily, overworked at the studio. I was inwardly ready for the bullet that I had come to Spain to get. I had a good grasp on the realities of the war itself. I knew, so did the whole world, that Spain was being used as a testing ground for the weapons to be used later in World War II. Hitler and Mussolini helped Franco. Russia helped the Loyalists. America was playing it neutral. In the human sense, I was for everybody. Why the hell did brother have to fight brother? I knew there were idealists, fanatics, nuts on the loyalist side. I understood that big money was sentimental to the Franco cause, or outrightly sympathetic. As to my own sympathetics, I decided that since the split was a revolution by Franco against the legally elected Republican government, then I leaned toward the left. There might be a little more idealism and humanity on that side. Not so with Coates. He was detached about everything except medicine. He professed not to give a damn who killed whom. He would have been quite capable of taking a Nazi belt and bashing the brains of a communist, and do the same thing to a Nazi with a communist belt, just to study the reactions of each. Yet he wanted to get into medical work where he would be dedicated to saving life. Pepe took us to Madrid. We were going there to see a big shot. He wouldn't say who, but it was a top brass loyalist. There was steady traffic over the road between the two cities. Supplies, soldiers, messengers, going between the two big cities. You went slowly. Sometimes planes came over. There were several cars, more or less official, in this entourage, and for the whole journey, one specific auto was in front of us. Once, as we halted to rest, a fellow in the front car named Jackson stepped out of his machine and held up a bar of candy. Did I want it? Or part of it? In that instant, a bomb landed nearby. Jackson was killed outright. Had I left our car and made a move towards him, I might have got it. That's what I had come here for. But Jackson, who probably wanted to live, was the one who was killed. I went on to Madrid a little shaken. Lily was somewhat out of my system now. Too much was happening around me. We arrived in the evening and put up at the Gran Via Hotel. The next morning, Coates' clock struck 9, waking us. He jumped out of bed. As his feet hit the floor, there came a whistling noise. The room shook. "What on earth was that?" I asked, going to the window. I heard the whistling noise again, and a large hole appeared in the building opposite. I stared incredulously. After a few more seconds, a third noise sounded, and a blast of air brushed past me. A corner of the building opposite blew off and shattered in the streets below. "Shells!" Coates shouted. We ran down into the lobby. The clerk seemed fairly unconcerned. "That's the Germans," he said. "They always shell at 9 o'clock. He went on to say that the building opposite was the communications center. The Germans on the university front were trying to knock it out, being unaware that the equipment had been moved. I asked him for another room. He suggested one 2 floors below ours, which was double the price. "How about one near the lobby?" "All occupied by journalists," he said. Even the basement was full of correspondence. Another shell burst. 8, said the clerk. "We usually get 10. 2 more came, putting an end to the morning's bombardment." We ventured out into the street. There, the crowds hardly noticed the building opposite. 2 English-speaking youths were examining the hole in the Telefonica with interest. "They're pretty sure to win now," one said. "I betted that 50 shells would knock it in half, but 48 haven't, so I might as well pay off." He told us about the fighting on the Northern Front. "I'm an American with the Abraham Lincoln Brigade," he said. His companion stared at me. "You're Errol Flynn," he said accusingly. "What the hell are you doing over here?" I said I was covering the war for a couple of magazines. I was trying to be an impartial and fair observer. That seemed to upset them. "You can't be fair with bastards like them," one said. Pepe showed us a schedule for the day. "First, we must get you a salvo conducto pass. You won't be safe anywhere without one." He said that nothing must happen to gentlemen of our importance. Importance? Coates and I glanced at each other. At noon, we lunched with General von Helmuth. He was more than a soldier of fortune, a brilliant staff officer. He was a member of the upper echelon of the Republican staff, having fled from Nazi Germany. He was an idealist, a man of great reputation, and the world watched his exploits with an inferior army. It seemed incredible that he would want to see us. Of what possible importance could we be in his life? 2 military guards ushered us into an unpretentious building. I saw a man with an aquiline nose, thin brows, thin hair, even thin boots. He bowed Prussian style. We each muttered something, then sat down at the table. He sat between Coates and me. About 20 other officers were present. The general, to my surprise, bowed his head and said grace in Spanish. The lunch was difficult, for the general seemed to prefer not to speak German to Coates and said scarcely a word to me. The food was a tasteless bean soup and a tasteless steak. An officer whispered, "Donkey meat. We ran out of horses." After the food, the general rose and started to read from a paper. In a monotone, he read of the heartfelt emotions and happiness the Spanish people felt that their hero of the screen, an upholder of justice, Errol Flynn, was with them. The Spanish people would never forget this. He didn't mention which part of the Spanish people. I sat there in amazement, trying not to show surprise to be cast in such a role. When he finally came to an end, I stood up and said, "Thank you." The general said he couldn't disappoint the enemy, and he had to get back to the war. We laughed mirthlessly, then rose and left. "What the hell is this all about?" I whispered to Coates. "Why were we getting such special attention?" We went with the local junta to the outskirts of the Algeciras. We went with the local junta to the outskirts of the Algeciras. The soldiers in our group hailed an elderly priest who was walking over a narrow log crossing the river. He told them he had been hiding out in a garret for several months. He didn't look very wan. He weighed about 250 pounds. Somebody prevailed upon the military group to give the priest the chance to walk along this log. It would be sporting. He was so fat. He lifted up his cassock and started across in his sandals. The agreement was that if he got to the other side, he'd be allowed to live. As soon as he almost reached the opposite side, there was a burst of machine gun fire. The priest looked as if he had been cut in half with a cleaver. The handicapper in me was roused to fury and resentment. This was not sporting. I grabbed hold of our guide, Pepe, and yelled, "You lousy bastards! You gave him a chance, didn't you? He got over, didn't he? Why didn't you let him live? Is this the way you fight a war?" Coates grabbed me by the shoulder and hissed, "Shut up or we'll both be shot, idiot!" Pepe was afraid that what we had just witnessed might get back to the United States, and he tried to pacify me. I had been commissioned by William Randolph Hearst himself to cable any stories I could, but I hadn't got around to sending any news dispatches yet. Coates regarded me with amusement. It seemed ridiculous to him that I should be so upset over the death of a stranger. We walked into the darkened streets. I cursed the cruelty I had witnessed by the Loyalists, with whose general objective I felt an accord. Suddenly, a feminine voice challenged us. "Salvo conducto." Coates chucked the girl under the chin paternally and smiled. She reached into the top of her dress between her breasts and whipped out a gun. "Pronto!" She jabbed him in the stomach with the pistol. Chastened, Coates dropped back a foot or two, momentarily alarmed. He searched his pockets for the paper she wanted. I stepped back into the shadows and had a better look while this interplay went on between the two. Amusement was coming back to Coates. He seemed attracted by the girl. She had dark hair far down over her forehead, a hard line for a mouth. Her figure wasn't bad, but there was a deadly seriousness in her eyes. A little girl playing partisan and being grim about it, while Coates struggled to find his identification. Suddenly, Coates decided to take a second chance. His hairy paw went out to her face in what I suppose he considered a tender gesture. There was a sudden report. A bullet fired from her gun went through Coates' shirt and grazed his skin. She started to back away and stumbled on some debris behind her. Coates reached out and grabbed her. He took the gun out of her hands, saying gently, "Do you really need this?" I emerged partly from my corner under a Spanish balcony. I had been watching the scene like a director studying a set before the camera turns. About 50 yards up the road, I heard a shell burst. While I was entranced, the balcony above me, already half shot away by gunfire, collapsed. It gave way from the detonation of the distantly exploding shell. The last I remembered was that curious sight of Coates pulling the girl towards him and his arms going around her neck affectionately. Then a blinding light as the balcony collapsed and hit me on the head. I was out. Errol Flynn killed in Spain, screamed the headlines. The incident was reported all over the world and must have made Lily thoughtful. I awoke in a hospital, the annex of an old monastery. Coates was attending to me, but mostly he was hard at work operating on the wounded men constantly being brought in from the battlefront. Lying there on a hospital cot, it occurred to me that nothing in this war seriously terrified me. Why was it I had no fear? I didn't understand my own reactions. You heard the sound of a shell, mortar, bullets, explosions, distantly or close all the time. Yet I wasn't nearly as bothered as I had been in the old days when my raft turned over in the Sepik River and a croc picked up my Kanaka boy and pulled him under the water. Was I still suffering so badly from the frightening experience of temperamental Lily that, after her, civil war seemed mild? After a few days, I stood at Coates' side as he operated. He was at his best now, a scientist who worked day and night. He relished it. Men were brought in moaning, with death rattles. Rows of wounded were laid out in the corridors. Coates was a dedicated man. He went from bed to bed, scalpel in hand, operating as best he could with the use of ether. The ether smell filled the hospital. This went on for weeks. I tried to help, but wasn't of much use. Coates was near collapse. He didn't take coffee, liquor, or cigarettes, so there was no use offering them to him. But he made me wonder at the variety to be found in human beings. Why was he totally uninterested in the ideological values of the war, yet totally interested in trying to preserve life? Once a high-ranking officer was brought into the room. His tattered uniform clung to his wounds. He stood there, gray-haired, almost at attention, in the shadow of the lamp under which Coates operated. Coates didn't notice him. He was busy working on a man who had a shattered knee. Coates turned his attention to the officer. They took the coat off, and Coates saw that the man's arm was hanging only by a piece of skin and flesh. Coates called for the ether to put the man out and deftly cut the arm off. But the officer had lost so much blood he was near death. "Remarkable," said Coates. "Can't understand how he stood up." He looked down at the prone figure. I wonder what the hell he's dying for at this minute." He pondered a second. "Here's a man whose arm I have just removed, and right before our eyes, he's dying." He shook his head. His attitude was cold and clinical. He muttered, "Wonder when he last got laid." The officer died a few minutes later. I had seen so much that day, I felt I had a bellyful. I wondered what good I was to anyone. How could you get stories like this back to the States? To what end? Just to tell tales of bravery and suffering and belief? Sometimes Coates mentioned Lita, the girl who had taken a shot at him. They saw each other from time to time when she came to the hospital. He would stop work for a minute or so to talk with her, and then she'd be gone. Nights when he wasn't working, they stayed together. One evening, there was a flurry at the monastery door. Something had to be told to Coates, and nobody wanted to do it. Bearers came in, bringing a body. Lita had been raped and murdered. The body was laid on the table. Whoever had done it had used a knife and slit her dress from the neck down. Afterwards, he had practically slit her into two pieces. The trunk was still bleeding. I thought Coates would crack. I almost did myself, but he didn't. Some bubbles rose in his mouth. One of his big hands took her around the shoulders, and the hand seemed to go around her neck in a last affectionate touch. Only from that gesture could I gather that he had some rich feeling about her. Then, like the scientist he was, he snapped out of it. He stared at the remains. "Remarkable case," he said. He turned and went outside. In the days that followed, I saw more of the spectacles that only a civil war, with its hatreds and its hopes, can yield up. I saw 3 nuns ransack corpses for anything they could pick out of the clothes that had been worn. Yet the same nuns carried buckets of human excrement from the typhoid patients and cleaned the buckets with their own hands. Spain had become a bowl filled to the brim with corruption, violence, murder. The young grew old before my eyes. The old no longer wanted to live. I saw homeless people, fanatics, dreamers, the brave and the brash and the stupid. Spain was the dream of a broken home. While the war was waged, domestic life ran along silently at its side. Women fetched water from the well. They carried it home and they washed. I saw a dead priest hauled out of a cellar. They certainly hated the church. Perhaps the church had gone away from its roots and its reason. There were boards around him, like a sandwich man, and on the boards were the words, "I am a priest and a coward. I don't know how to fight, only to preach lies." A woman picked up a bucket and flung it at the corpse in a fury. Another woman picked up a bucket and struck the fist, saying, "He was a man of God." Sometimes, at night, the air was soft, even beautiful. It was hard to believe then that a nation was taking its entrails out and laying them before the world. A commissar wondered whether I could do real fighting for the cause. They gave me a machine gun and said I must go to a certain point and begin shooting. No more giving revolution a whirl. Get in there and earn your right to be a loyalist supporter. And to hell with that foreign correspondent stuff. From my post, I could see the fire flashing over the trees and hear the artillery rumbling steadily. My hands were on the machine gun. I couldn't do it. I simply couldn't shoot people down. Maybe this wasn't my war after all. I didn't want to kill anyone, not for political reasons. I didn't want to fire guns for uncertain ideas. I'd handled weapons galore in pictures, but there was a vast gap between the make-believe of films and the reality here. I resumed hanging about coats at the monastery. I helped him. I flitted from hospital to hotel. Pepe stayed at my side. Almost wherever I went, he was there. I wondered why. Why wasn't I left alone? What did Pepe want? What did they want? It was at this time I met Estrella. She was lovely, truly Spanish, with a sense of humor that wasn't usual for a Spanish girl. I found Spanish girls to be a little ferocious and passionately, alarmingly sincere. Estrella had long dark hair, a narrow waistline, long shapely legs, and no knees, it seemed. The legs seemed to go straight from the hips down to the ankles. Certainly each toe was a joy to look at, so were her hands. She had an alabaster skin. When she stood up naked, she seemed bewitching as a siren. She was young, and I hold nothing against youth. Always, wherever I have been, in no matter what situation, it seems that a woman has finally symbolized my presence. Estrella was my symbolization in Spain. Now I could leave Spain, start afresh somehow. It was all out of me, the deep melancholy, the flight from Lily, from the studio tension, the death wish. I had reached the point where I told Pepe to stay away from me. Why did he follow me around like a puppy? Hadn't he anything better to do in the war than shadow me? I still could not figure out why these people were going to such lengths to treat us well. Why did we get so much better treatment than other war correspondents? "What do you want of us?" I asked him after 2 months had gone by. "Look, Mr. Flynn," he said, when are you going to give us the money?" I looked at him for a long second. Had I heard him right? "The $1 million, Pepe added. "We've been waiting." "What million?" Pepe elaborated. "You've brought over $1 million from Hollywood collected from some of the biggest stars." He mentioned a few names. I was speechless. I told Pepe that I was flattered that they had thought we were entrusted with such a large sum, but it never happened. I reiterated that I was there for personal reasons and as a war correspondent, an observer, nothing else. Coates and I figured we had better get out of Spain right away. On the way out of Spain, I mused at length how the Spaniard could have got the idea I was the bearer of $1,000,000. Coates started to chortle raucously. "What's so funny?" I demanded. He moved into uproarious laughter. He told me he had set up this idea when he arrived, buzzing the world to the reception committee, but telling them that the money was not available yet. It would be in due course. That was why they gave us a car and a chauffeur guide. What I wanted was a chance to operate, to work and operate, that's all, he said. The only way I could do it and get by in style here was to use you. After his thunderous guffaws settled, I said, "Thank you, comrade son of a bitch."